Okay, hi guys. Here I'm just kind of adjusting things. All right, I guess that works. Okay, so here we are, having listened to President Trump's speech and listened to Steve Bannon's commentary and the people that he had on there. It's a lot, and I'm going to try and summarize this as best I can. I think the most important point was the reference to the 5 points concerning election fraud. So that would have been the role of the CCP. That would have been, we're going to put the other thing, the voter rolls. And boy, how the states, I would say, executed these elections, which is something we have to take a good look at. Georgia is still, I think, on the top of the list as far as bad performance is concerned. However, with all the time that I've spent trying to understand what has been happening, I've looked at the bad behavior of state officials. I've looked at the roles of various NGOs. I've looked at the type of, should I call it, defense that various people have run on behalf of these bad actors. And, I had really put the CCP in the background. Hadn't really given them that much consideration. Although I had talked about this one shot during the 2020 election when votes were being counted, and it showed this woman sitting at a desk with all this paper, and she happens to have like one of these express mailers, but it was from China. Well, wait a second. Why would you have an express mailer from China if you're counting American ballots? I'm sure somebody could come up with some interesting excuse, but no, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it at all. So that was just one small part of this problem. Now, the other thing that's important as part of the stitching together of all these different parts, because it gets complicated. Oh my goodness, does it get complicated? Was an article published in Time magazine a couple months after, so I think it was February. So it would have been February of 2021 when this article was put out, in which, for all intents and purposes, the author, I think the name was Ball, I'm not sure, was boasting about how they had to, you got to remember this word, it's very important, fortify. Yes, they talked about the need to fortify the vote. Isn't that a great one? Fortify the vote. That's what they were talking about at the time. And so now we can put this into some context. But still, you had all these different players having different roles. People who were printing the ballots, people who were shipping the ballots, poll workers. You had registrars in terms of how they're handling the voter rolls. You had, we would look, one reaction, of course, is, well, how could there possibly be fraud if all these different people were involved and they would serve as checks along the way in this system? Well, it seems that there was a lot of fraud. And I like to use the example, long forgotten, that, again, Georgia, I have to emphasize, is the real bad actor with all this election fraud. And they remain that. Was, what was it? Oh, yes. So investigators were taking affidavits, sworn affidavits from people who wanted to be whistleblowers and say, look, I saw something in this voting place here that didn't seem right, whether it was how mail-in ballots are being handled or counting the vote or, how they recorded votes or whatever it was. Well, hold on to your hat. Are you ready? 34,000 sworn affidavits in Georgia by people who said they saw something wrong. These affidavits were submitted to Brad Raffensperger, the so-called Secretary of State in Georgia, and he promptly ignored every single one of them. All right, so that's just one case. And as you dig through, you will find many others. There was stuff that carried over in Arizona to the 2024 election, which was outrageous. And I think the the part that I find amazing is if you stop and look at this, it's just the creativity is remarkable. They didn't think of one thing with the mail-in ballots. They came up with another thing with how they print the ballots. And if it wasn't that, it was so-called machine malfunctions. And if it wasn't that, then it was something with the absentee ballots. And if it wasn't that, then it was some other thing. Now, for me, the part that's going to be really interesting is when we finally get around, yes, to the wireless modems. The wireless modems. Who in their right mind would want to put a wireless modem in a voting machine? The hint is maybe they wanted to cheat. So I believe his name was Perna. I'd have to double check. This is a lawyer in Michigan who in, I want to say 2021, 2022, had gotten his hands on a voting machine in Michigan. And he got into a lot of trouble for it because the perpetrators were running the state. But he had found an engineer who had studied the components that made up this tabulator and had discovered, sure enough, there was a wireless modem in there. What's it doing there? It's not supposed to be there. You keep telling us that these machines are standalone and have no connection to the internet. Can't have that if you've got a wireless modem. Sorry. So we fast forward to today. And as I'm told, although I would need to confirm this as well, that there are wireless modems in the tabulators in the state of Connecticut. The Secretary of State, Stephanie Thomas, says, oh, yeah, that's not a problem. Yeah, we need them there. But no. We disabled them for the election. I would say that is about as weak-ass an excuse as any you can come up with. So the fact that in Connecticut, where there's lots of like little pieces of fraud, which I've reported on before, you have this problem, okay, that they're not admitting to. And of course, we don't have any systems, any independent evaluators to determine whether or not fraud is being committed with these things. So as for example, just a thought, you would take these machines, and because they are modems, they are wireless modems, you would have to have a sensor, a transceiver, or something that can determine whether or not an electronic signal is going back and forth, or radio signal going back and forth between this wireless modem in the machine and someplace else. It poses a lot of questions. I understand that. But because that wireless modem is present there, it raises a lot of very reasonable suspicion. Okay, now all of this said, to go back to something that Jack Posobo said in Steve Bannon's show, that this was the greatest assault on American democracy in our history. Absolutely true. But what are we left with? We're left with what? Communist China, having worked since at least 2018 to put this whole thing together. So I come back to my first problem. Studying all these people and all the things they've done in this country, looking suspiciously at Raffensperger, looking suspiciously at the governor of Georgia, looking suspiciously at Arizona and Hobbs and these other people, right? We've got all that going on. In the meantime, China's doing its thing. One of the problems is with throwing China into the picture here is that if you go back in time, Mike Lindell got egg all over his face when they had claimed to have what amounted to packet data that had been picked up from China and other countries around the world. Well, it turned out that whole thing was a scam. Sorry, Mike Lindell didn't know what he's doing. There was somebody who tried to get him out of trouble, but it was too late when they had that big convention and everything. So that had to play itself out. So they are stuck with this embarrassing information that serves as a cover up for what was really going on with China. So the other part here, if you didn't listen to the speech, was how our intelligence agencies, who we will simply refer to as rogue bureaucrats, deep staters, for lack of a better term, who made sure that key information did not float to the top where it could be seen by President Trump and others. Well, it didn't happen, did it? Didn't happen. But now, thanks to Bill Pulte, thanks to John Solomon, thanks to Tulsi Gabbard, okay, the system has been set in motion. And has been pointed out, we are only, in terms of declassifying these documents and beginning to get to the bottom of this, we are only at the beginning. And so this is the word. I mean, I listen to it. The word I want everybody to grab onto here is systemic. We have been subjected to systemic fraud throughout the nation. So many different players. I wish I could find that article from Time Magazine because it was disgusting. All right. Without saying we cheated, it said we cheated, and here's how. Here's how. I hope that's used as part of the process of gathering evidence in order to prosecute these people. Now, there are names that are thrown around. I'm going to so Chris Wray lied, Bill Barr lied. Who's that other guy? McCabe. I think he had a role in this. There were a number, and they're just the tip of the iceberg because they would have had lieutenants reporting to them. So you just discover that there's this whole network. Now, the thing that I find curious is that even, or maybe because of the systemic nature of this fraud that was perpetrated against us, there is going to be some, hold on, incompetence. That's right. There's going to be some incompetence. And Steve Bannon suggested that President Trump had mentioned it, that here we go again, yet another case within these locked rooms, the FBI finding burn bags. More burn bags. Oh my goodness. I don't know. Maybe I should start getting suspicious because they keep talking about, hey, we found another set of burn bags. Is that like somebody say, hey, we found another bag of ballots that we missed? I don't know. I'll just say whatever was in those burn bags, if it's correlated with other documents throughout the intelligence agencies, then I think there's a chance that it's pretty valid. Okay, so the other thing I'd mentioned it, but I want to make a bigger point out of this is, okay, we'll accept for the moment foreign interference led primarily by China, and I think we're going to find that it wasn't just China. I think the surprise entrant here, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be Italy. Because when you look back, the Italian intelligence agency is underrated in terms of their capabilities. And the argument here is that they had something to do with running the fraud. But I have to say, it gets difficult. Boy, kind of regret not doing more with this. If we were to look back on the information that was coming out about the 2020 election, during 2021, 22, 23, we kept pulling up all these things, stuff in Italy, stuff in Spain, stuff in New Zealand, stuff in Switzerland, stuff in Germany. And somehow, and don't forget Venezuela. You know, President Trump did mention the Dominion machine stuff with Venezuela. And I do believe we're going to find out more about that as well. That China was sort of the mastermind behind all of this is, well, it's surprising, okay? But I'm not going to be too surprised. And it's going to be a function of what else comes out. Because, again, I just need to reemphasize what President Trump talked about tonight is just the beginning. Just the beginning. We're talking millions of documents. They have to go through their formal bureaucratic procedures for declassification. And there's going to be a steady stream. Now, we look at all this and we're going, well, this is crazy. How are you going to? We see what happened. The ability to continue to perpetrate this fraud is still in place, even if China is cut off. This is a problem. So how do we even begin to get control of this? Bannon and others have become a little more pessimistic about the Save America Act. However, if we're going to try and force some form of election integrity on the system as it exists, there are other choices besides the Save America Act. One that had been suggested was the executive order concerning election integrity, but the one now that the others in Bannon's group are pointing to is the fact that, of all people, Jay Johnson, who was the Department of Homeland Security director under Obama, ironically, had, I think if I have the year right, in 2015, specified and had included on the list of national security assets or issues was our election system. So if that's the case, and it hasn't been changed since then, there's no problem with being able to invoke Department of Homeland Security regulations in order to secure these elections going forward. Now, I'm not sure what that's going to look like at every polling place. I mean, the notion that some federal agent is going to be at every polling place in November, I'm not too comfortable with that. No. But if it's going to be what it takes to discourage fraud, well, then I guess that's what it has to be. But yes, I would say, in my opinion, right now, we're approaching what is legitimately an emergency status. But damn it, if we do this after the election, it's called stop, hit the reset button, okay? And now we're going to work on policy and procedure to make sure that we don't have to go through this ever again. And yes, in my opinion, top of the list, paper ballots. And I think, the whole concept, and another thing here is, because I'm not a big fan of federal involvement in these elections, even if we're electing, quote, federal officers in our elections, this to me is still very much a states' rights issue. And these forms of interference are not good. But if you have states continuing to, how should I say this, enable, that's the word. If they continue to enable fraud like it's happening right here in the state of Connecticut, sorry, Stephanie, then yes, unfortunately, federal involvement is called for. Something has to be done to set this straight because it's such a huge mess. In the meantime, I wish I knew what the answer was for how to deal with China. It's been suggested they would be punished, such as with more tariffs. But the problem in my mind is you want to find those people who have worked closely with China from day one in order to perpetrate this fraud. The people who work in the federal government, that members of our intelligence services who are compromised to this degree by communist China, this is a bad thing, okay? I'm going to mention the other term, captured elite. So if you don't know what a captured elite is, it's basically a foreign government bribing official or somebody who's in a high position of authority in an organization. It could be corporate, it could be government, it could be academic, doesn't matter. But China has done a very good job of capturing many of our elites, and that they would have done that in corporations for the sake of election fraud, in our government agencies, our intelligence agencies for the sake of election fraud, is something that we have to consider. And I'm sorry if you have done this. Yeah, somebody has to go to jail. Somebody has to be in prison for having violated not just the law, but the trust of the American people. Now, in the meantime, you have these useful idiots. I can't remember, they come on, they're on TikTok, they're on X, they're on TV sometimes, intoning the same crap. We have the most secure elections ever. Nonsense. And I think this is going to pretty much put the lie to it. You know, one of the worst actors for anybody who follows this is a gentleman named Mark Elias. And I certainly would look forward to seeing how he's going to handle this, because but basically the message to Mr. Elias is, if it's a lie, prove it. What facts do you have to tell you that it's a lie? Okay. If you're going to play the evidence game, go ahead. Because once again, the thing you might want to keep in mind, Mr. Elias, is we are just getting started. Just getting started. Yes. And there will be such an array, okay, like stars in the sky, of all these pieces of evidence shining down on us. And hopefully you'll be ready to deal with it. But somehow, I think not. So yes, I have to reiterate, we have so many different players, so many different moving parts here. It's going to take time to get it sorted out. But please, dear God, please, these people need to be perp walked. They need to have cuffs on them. They need to go to jail. Okay? There need to be trials where all this information is laid out in detail. I just, so many things. I mean, a small thing, like just a small example. Okay, there was some dust up over the last several years over, I don't want to call it an embassy, consulate in Houston, Texas, manned by members of the Communist Party. So this is supposed to be an official diplomatic mission. And they've been caught more than a few times doing things they shouldn't be doing. What a surprise. But hey, in the context of this election, we want to see more information, right? So let me just grab some other things here. It is curious. So ABC and NBC decided not to do this. That kind of looks like they're guilty parties somehow in all of this. What are their relationships with Communist China? We would love to know. ABC and NBC. But it was CBS that was willing to carry this speech. So good for them. And I have to offer this up. I mean, CBS still has a long way to go if they're going to regain the full trust of the American people. Redoing 60 Minutes is a good start. But the way that I say, I didn't watch it on CBS, so I don't know how it went. But we do know that Fox News made a hash out of all of this. So Steve Bannon has carried on over and over again about how Fox News has tried to downplay this as much as possible. And so I didn't see it, but according to Steve Bannon in the commentary following the speech, Sean Hannity was less than engaged in the subject, shall we say, which I find strange, because I would believe, knowing Sean as we do, this would be something that bothers the hell out of him. Yet his bosses are telling him, keep your mouth shut. If you're going to say anything about it, you got 5 seconds to move on. All right. So there must be another part to this to consider. It's what individuals can do. I think, let me just tick off a few. All right. In Connecticut, we have Linda Sinkowitz, Fight Voter Fraud. We have Linda DeLazio. I think it was Fight Connecticut or something. And then we have two other people whose names escape me right now who are doing different things with respect to election fraud in the state of Connecticut. You have Catherine Engelbrook with True the Vote. You have Cleta Mitchell with Election Integrity, the Election Integrity Network. You have a number of people who are all stepping up in various ways. And one of the things to keep in mind is, even though we get to see these people in the camera, you have to keep in mind that there's a lot going on behind the scenes. The thing is, I would like to have a stronger sense of just how full that project really is. Because right now it's just, oh, she's working on something. She can't really talk about it. And oh, yeah, there's another thing going on there. And yeah, we can't talk about that too much either. So maybe maybe it's about timing, and there'll become a moment when, bam, um, justice. We'll see the wheels of justice turning a little bit faster. Wouldn't that be nice? So the other thing that gets me is how the blue states, including Connecticut, have failed to cooperate. Um, I forget was it President Trump. I think President Trump made the point that just from the voter rolls from the red states, and I think that's still less than half of all the states in the nation of which they got the information, um, 250,000 legal aliens on those voter rolls who shouldn't be there. Well, if that's the case in the red states, you can be damn sure that it's a whole lot worse in the blue states. So we would be looking at some substantial number here. And again, it's this disregard. I mean, we know that the Democrats seem to be hell-bent on getting as many illegals onto the voter rolls as possible, believing that they will get elected over and over again. It's pathetic. Okay. I mean, it shows how desperate they are. It shows how they're losing ground. I'm in a state of constant awe at how the Democrats can be this venal. Venal, I think, is a good word for them. Yeah. So declassification. I want to say a little bit about Michigan. Okay, they kept talking about Michigan, and it was in Muskegon, and it was a Democrat get out the vote group in Muskegon, and it was the Michigan police who somehow stumbled across this operation in which they discovered that you had a number of people forging ballots, doing all weird things with mail-in ballots they shouldn't be doing, and the scale of it was so bad that they had to call in the FBI. What did the FBI do with this information? Nothing. And now we're left with wondering what the hell happened. And I'm going to throw in another one. As much as we have been, I'd say, maybe impressed and relieved to see that a number of these people are being called out and brought out, it's probably still just a small handful compared to the number of people who've been involved in this. It's going to be the world's weirdest organization chart when we finally put up on a wall showing the connections between all the different people and the different elements of the whole system, whether it was Homeland Security, the CIA, the FBI, did I say Department of Homeland Security? I guess I did. That in various ways we're working together to suppress information about fraud, to suppress information about how China had invaded our system. And somehow they're okay with this. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people who are working against the interests of this country. This is sad. I'll just say if I was younger, I would probably be doing something I would never have considered doing, and that is trying to become a bureaucrat in order to keep these other people from doing bad stuff to our country. A little old. Oh, well. So I can do this instead and hope that younger people step up to the plate and make the commitment. I mean, it's a hell of a commitment. All right, great. You're going to be a government employee. But the point is to be there and to start the process of restoring what is supposed to be, I'm going to say it. I can't believe I'm going to say it, but I'm going to say it. Honest government. How is that even possible? Well, I have to believe it's possible. And that goes for Connecticut as well. Yeah. All right. So what's going to happen after this? It's going to be more shocking revelations. We're going to see a lot of blowback from the press, and there's a component here. She hasn't really been dragged into the picture, but I do have to bring her up, and that would be Nancy Pelosi. So Jesse Waters had put out an announcement recently that there are 3 subpoenas for evidence from her concerning the business activities of her husband and their son, as well as herself. And among the allegations, I believe there's bribery. There is seditious, I hope I got this right, seditious treason? That seems sort of an odd term. And then a couple other sort of major felonies that they've committed. So this was announced, this was read on the floor of the House of Representatives that this was underway. So it'll be interesting to see what Ms. Pelosi has to say in response. I can only hope that more things come to light. And by the way, I just need to remind you one more example of just how compromised people in government were. There was the case of the late senator from California, not Barbara Boxer, I'm sorry, Diane. Wow, drawing a blank on her name. I can't believe this. Here, let me just take a second. Former female senators from California. Hey, look at that. It's knew I was going to put in California. That's pretty slick. Ah, yes, Dianne Feinstein. She was the one. All right. If you remember, Dianne Feinstein got a little bit of trouble. Yeah, Feinstein. Thanks, JK. She had a driver, Chinese, who it turns out worked for the CCP. Now, the question we need to have answered was Ms. Feinstein aware of her driver's affiliation? Was he a point of contact for various things that were going on? Now, by the way, Ms. Feinstein did find her way to China on occasion, and there were some very nice people who took some pictures of her on her trips to China. Now, of course, she could be doing this in official capacity as a senator. But in light of all the other stuff that we've had going on, you have to wonder. And by the way, the other thing I want to add to this discussion is that the concept of being a captured elite may turn out to be a lot more subtle and nuanced than we realize. So it isn't just doing dirty work for the Chinese. You know what? It isn't just lobbying for the Chinese without being a lobbyist. You know, it could be little things. From where the communist Chinese sit, they're saying, well, we have this little project here. It's of tactical importance, and we really need to get somebody to do it, and with as little fuss as possible. Gee, I guess we should call up Senator Feinstein. And it's probably a lot of the captured elite who are like that. So I don't know if we'll ever get the complete story, just saying. But it's a question to be asked. And there's so many ways in which they, oh God, where do I go with this? I wanted to say something about the COVID vaccines, COVID-19 stuff, but I'm just going to say that it's really three big things. Three big things. It is the virus, it is the vaccine, and the one that nobody wants to talk about, the PCR test. Okay, so the PCR test was used to legitimize all this nonsense that was happening, especially in the early 20s. I will just say, I'm digressing. I know this isn't about the speech, but it's an important digression in my humble opinion. The PCR test was a complete fraud. You had another type, an antibody test. All right, we'll get to that. But what happened was, in the fullness of time, let me focus on one thing. A virologist, I wish I knew his name. He was bald. He was a Facebook account he was on, and he described how he had acquired, in round numbers, let's say 10,000 blood samples of people who had COVID. So he, being the good virologist that he is, and fie on all you people who don't think viruses exist. Boy, are you stupid. The finding was that they could, I mean, based upon what was available at the time, which is kind of bogus, that's another discussion, that constituted COVID-19 viruses or SARS-2 viruses, were false. In other words, he reported, after looking at all these samples, that he found nothing that would be considered COVID. Let's see, Kary Mullis. Yes, that's right, him too. Correct. That's right. Which is a whole other discussion too. I want to go back and understand why Kary Mullis was down on the PCR test. I mean, it has, I'm shaking my head, diagnostic capability, but I'll get into an analogy about this. I don't want to dwell on this too long. So what was the other part of this? The virologist also shared his samples with a number of other virology labs, and they all came back with the same thing. What COVID virus? Based upon what you're telling us should be the COVID virus, the antigens, the DNA sequences, we're not finding it. What we are finding is flu A and flu B. Yes, I remember. That's right. Kary was a really interesting dude, you know. We'll have to talk about when Kary took LSD. Well, that's another story. All right, I'm getting off track here again. I got to get back onto this. Flu A, flu, and a little bit of flu B. By the way, anybody who followed this, and I'm guilty of having done this, is that the Centers for Disease Control was responsible for collecting data on pneumonia and flu. They tend to co-occur in reality, and reported like on a monthly basis. And you'd have, you know, in a bad season, there might be 40, 50,000 people who come down with the flu. That all disappeared. The PCR test came along. They start reporting all these results. And then suddenly, I'm pretty sure it was March of 2020, disappeared. No more reporting of flu cases, just like that. No one ever said anything about it, but some people could sort of, you know, fill in the blanks there. All right, so there's that. Meantime, our gentleman virologist who had shown that they could not find any example of COVID virus in all these blood samples had gone to the CDC and said, we have this data, but, you know, you need to send us your reference samples, your COVID-19 SARS-2 virus reference samples. That was a humana moment for the CDC because they didn't have any COVID-19 SARS-2 reference samples to give. Fair question. If you don't have reference samples, how can the PCR test possibly give you any positive results for COVID-19 SARS-2? Couldn't do it. Well, of course, this virologist got very upset. So he sued the CDC. Might have sued the FDA too, I'm not sure. In any event, it was interesting that a couple of months after he had started suing them, the FDA, I want to say the FDA, came out with an announcement. It was July of 2020 or 2021, saying, yeah, this PCR test has got a few flaws. Yeah, it's not working like we think it should. Yeah, we're going to have to do something about this. And then for the next 6 to 8 months, they were doing weird dances around this, okay? So eventually, the PCR basis for testing for the virus went away. Bye. And they put in its place what became a home test that all these people have been using for the last several years, which is not a PCR test. It is an antigen test. the same old, boring, garden variety antigen test. All right. Instead of analyzing nucleotides, you're analyzing proteins. So you're still stuck with the same problem. And that is, how do we know that this particular binding event is really, for COVID, dramatic pause, when you don't have the reference samples? How do you do that? Any explanations? No. People just ignore it, move on. Okay, so there's a crime that's been committed here, and we've just glossed over it like nobody's business. So anyway, that's the third leg of the scam. All right. The virus, the vaccine, and the PCR test. All right. So I had to get that off my chest. So again, you're going to find, so that becomes complicated. I mean, it's really amazing when if as it appears, when we put this all together, the extent to which the Communist Chinese Party has set about trying to destroy this country. And the point was well taken. There's what is it called? Well, information warfare. Yeah, I guess that's where we're going with this. Information warfare becomes a tool for asymmetrical warfare. Okay. China realized that it didn't have the resources to really go after us, so it had to think of every sneaky, underhanded, low-down, cheat and lying thing they could come up with in order to come after us. And the striking at our healthcare system, I think, was obviously a brilliant choice. And I guess the biggest capture lead of all, the one we haven't really talked about, is, yes, good old Dr. Anthony Fauci. Yeah, so between his covering up what was happening at the Wuhan lab, his lies about gain of function, and all the other crap that he's done, guilty, just guilty. And he's going to be testifying soon. It's going to be interesting. What a sweet day it would be to see him taken out in handcuffs. Wow. Oh God. Anyway, there's a book by our current Health and Human Services Secretary, RFK Jr., The Real Anthony Fauci. Anybody who reads it will clearly understand that this Dr. Fauci guy should never have been anywhere near the things that he was. But he just seemed to be, the penultimate political animal, and he was able to amass power to himself by the clever use of the NIH money that he was given. Yeah, it's just, there's a story to be told, and it's a bad story. That's all I can say. Okay, so I want to just try and wrap up here and then call it a night on this. What's the most important part of this? The most important part is what's still to come. That's the thing. We're going to have to watch this with bated breath. And, somebody also made a point that the extent of the cover-up, in other words, if you look at all the players who were involved in working with the CCP or not working with the CCP for the purpose of suppressing the vote, all of that added up is so much greater as a cover-up than anything that ever happened around the Biden laptop, Hunter Biden laptop. It's quite remarkable. So many guilty people. It's like, why? Did you do this for money? Did you do it just because you hated President Trump? Why? It was just for money? I mean, it's just the appalling disregard that these people have. I would want to go through each and every single individual who was captured in the operation in Michigan, and I'd want to look them in the eye, and I'd want to ask them, what made you do this? You knew that this was dishonest. You knew that you're breaking the law. You knew you were violating the trust of the American people when you did this. Why? And it doesn't matter. I mean, you can explain it to me. None of it's acceptable to me. Oh, yeah. Thanks, JK. I, wow. Yeah, I'm going to have to spend some time reflecting on this because the breadth and depth of it is mind boggling. So, yeah. So, on that happy note, guys, I'm calling it a night. We'll probably pick up on this again when I talk with Jason tomorrow, hopefully. Okay. Well, thanks for listening. And manana, manana, manana.